Hey ladies, welcome back to the Finding Joy in Your Home podcast. I am your host, Jami Balmet. Today we're talking about freezer cooking. We're going to really just get into some tips and tricks on getting food prepped ahead. And I think sometimes we think of freezer cooking as this very narrow, like cook all your meals, freeze everything. But freezer cooking is actually pretty wide. Like there's a lot of different things we can do with freezer cooking that incorporate different parts of getting meals prepped ahead and just getting some of that work done in bulk. So that's what we're going to talk about today because I am doing some real life freezer cooking myself right now. And I've been thinking through all these tips and tricks because I've been freezer cooking for 15 years now. And every time you do it, you learn a little bit more, you find recipes you love, and so that's what we're going to be sharing today. First up, I have a couple of announcements for you. The first announcement is that we have our final shop closing sale. So this is huge news. I shared this in last week's episode, but our Finding Joy shop, our digital shop, this is not our cookbooks and our print books and everything. This is our digital shop that has our ebooks, our courses, our online conferences, our printable packs. Our online digital store is actually closing down. This is the very last week. Wednesday, let's see what date Wednesday is. I think it's the 20th. No, the 21st. Wednesday, the 21st will be the very last time that you can ever purchase these items with lifetime access. So you'll be able to get them, download them, whatever. You'll have access for life. Anybody who's already purchased, you have access for life. None of that's changing. That's not going away. But the way that we serve our digital content, the way that we serve our audience and our community is going to be changing in a huge way. And you know what? It's really good things. This is not the end of our shop. This is not a bad move. This is actually to pave the way for something really new and exciting coming March 11th. I can't believe it. I'm not ready. We have a lot of work to do behind the scenes. March 11th, we have something brand new launching that's going to just be absolutely incredible. The next step in our business, the next step in serving you guys. So make sure you watch out for that. We also have, along with that, our announcements are that we have a brand new website coming in March. We're just redoing all of our websites and stuff at the same time. We're getting a glam up on everything. You're going to be able to find resources better, resource lists. All of it's going to get a huge facelift. And we are also going to have a bunch of fun giveaways. Like March is going to be the time that you want to pay attention with all the fun stuff going on. So if you want to check out that final shop closing sale, findingjoyshop.com, everything in our shop is either $10 or $5, which is insane. I mean, our homesteading conference that we sell for $100 for $99, you can get for just $10. Any of our other online conferences, our smaller printable packs are just $5. So you can go check out everything there. It's all either $5 or $10. Really, I mean, steeply discounted. And it's been so fun doing this kind of last hurrah sale. So head over to findingjoyshop.com. All right, so let's dive in with some freezer cooking tips. So I am in the middle this week of doing a really big freezer cooking session. In the past, I have preferred to set aside like an entire day and do all my freezer cooking at once. But most of you guys know I am first trimester pregnant right now. I've been super sick, super drained of energy. I'm getting some energy back. I'm feeling a little better this week. Praise God. I'm feeling very thankful and I'm moving around more and getting stuff done. I did cleaning yesterday. I did cooking both in the same day, which is huge from where I've been, especially in January. And so I'm really feeling like I got to get this house in order. And so with that, I have a very large freezer cooking menu that I'm doing right now. I'm doing 8 breakfasts, 10 dinners, and a couple other like a little additional things. And so with that, I am breaking it out over several days. So I've done 2 mini sessions so far. I did a bunch of baking the first day and yesterday I did like 5 breakfasts. And then I'm hoping early this week, Monday, Tuesday, to be able to just like really wrap up the rest of the breakfast and the dinners and kind of just like whip it out there and get it all done and in the freezer. But it's been really great getting back in. And I'm like, this is the first time I've been cooking in a month and a half, basically. And so really getting all this done has been wonderful. And the rest of our February and March are absolutely slammed because we have this big new project coming, plus some other things on our schedule that are just making February and March feel quite insane. And so because of that, I knew I needed to get some like food prep underway. Being so sick in January, we really just ate through our reserves of anything that was in the pantry and the freezer. And we were just doing bare bones, like throw some meals together, snacky dinners, and that's fine. We got through the bulk of my really bad morning sickness. We survived. But now I'm facing a next busy month and a half, and I'm like, I got to figure out how to feed my family well in this month and a half that I already know I'm not going to be like tip top 100% speed. And I feel like I got to get this house together. And I just need to do this in a way that's going to work well with my time. And so I planned out this whole menu, and I've been kind of slowly knocking it out. And it's been wonderful. It's been so great. Even a couple of breakfasts that I made to get those in the freezer. I really love doing freezer meal breakfasts because obviously they work great for breakfast. But when you're really busy and having a tough week, throw some simple oatmeal up for breakfast and then have that freezer meal for dinner. Like I made this really gorgeous French toast bake yesterday that has apples and raisins and maple syrup in it. And it's so good. And I mean, I just wanted to bake it right then and there, but I put it in the freezer. That would be obviously a great breakfast, but that would also work so well on some night that we're busy the next couple of weeks to pull out and bake and have this amazing whole food French toast bake that I've made ready to go. So as I've been working through this freezer cooking, I've had some questions on Instagram, and I've also been thinking of some of my tips or things that I would like to, pull up and remember. It's been a long time since I've done some concerted freezer cooking like this. Okay, so first thing, let's talk about this. I had somebody on Instagram say, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but she said something to the effect of, I'm really interested in doing freezer cooking, but my husband thinks everything's going to taste like it came out of the freezer. Do you have any tips? And I asked her if she's ever done any freezer cooking, and she said she hasn't, but she's excited to. So I think there is this fear that freezer cooking means like freezer burnt, tasteless, bland food. And I'm sure that could be the case. I'm sure there are some things that get put in the freezer that you pull out and you're like, but that has not been my experience in my case with freezer cooking. And the thing is, yes, you have to learn. There's certain things that don't freeze well. I mean, you almost pretty much can freeze everything. There's a few certain things that don't freeze as well. Their texture is going to come out funky. There's some really good tips of, don't put the sour cream on. Freeze it, and then once you bake it, put your sour cream on top. That's going to make a big difference. There's tips and tricks that you learn like that. But for the most part, we're freezing regular meals that we just would eat normally. We're not doing necessarily like specialty freezer items. We're making normal food that just freeze well. And if I served it to my whole family, they wouldn't be able to tell if I had just made it fresh or if it was frozen and then baked, right? They wouldn't be able to tell. And so I think a lot of this is really just figuring out how to do this well, how to do recipes that your family likes. Freezer cooking doesn't have to look a certain way. And I remember I had a comment a long time ago from someone saying, I would really love to do freezer cooking, but my husband doesn't like casseroles. So in her mind, the only way you can do freezer cooking is if you make casseroles. I am making, in this meal plan, I have like this hash brown thing that's like technically kind of a casserole, but it's like a breakfast. So yeah, I guess it's a casserole. But also, what is a casserole? It's a pretty wide definition, right? But nothing else I'm making in this entire meal plan is a casserole. And so I think a lot of times we just get into this very like narrow view of what we can freeze, what freezer cooking is. And so I really want to challenge you that if you're thinking, the time sounds so great to put 6 hours in the kitchen and then just have some meals ready to go, to really explore this and try it out, because freezer cooking is probably a lot more broad than you think it is. So I would just say that look for foods that your family already likes, already loves. Play with it a little bit, because you do every once in a while you'll freeze something that you're like, that just didn't, quite turn out as well. But for the most part, you're not even gonna be able to tell a difference that it was frozen. And I think that's a really important distinction, because some people do have a very negative view of like what freezer cooking is. And I just don't think that that's needed. Okay, so my first tip for you is to figure out what works best in the season that you're in. And so I'm talking about freezer cooking methods. We're going to talk a little bit about that, kind of the different ways you can do this. But I'm also talking about the food. I'm talking about how fancy you're going to get. I'm talking about how simple you want to be with the meals. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach this. There's a lot of different things that you can put in the freezer, parts of meals, whole entire meals, just breakfast, all of that. And so really figuring out what is going to serve you well for the season you're in is really, really helpful. So I have had seasons. Okay, so I've shared this before, but when Jason and I were first married, not first married. Our first year married, both of us were in college, full-time, working full-time. But then this must be like 2 years married. Second year married, we were like into our third year, I guess. Anyway, it does not matter because I had 2 more years of college when we got married. So it was my first year working full time without college. And I had a 45-minute commute to work. And so I was gone longer than Jason. I left before he did because his office was 10 minutes from our house. I had 45 minutes, and on Fridays that was a good hour because Friday traffic was always crazier. And so I left before Jason and I got home after Jason. And if I ever needed to stop by the grocery store on the way home, like I was getting home after 6 and then trying to get, dinner ready to go. And so that was the season that I really learned how to freezer cook, because I didn't have time. And yet we wanted to have good meals, right, on our table. And so it was so great because I would do all this prep ahead work, 1 day a month, and then I could just pull stuff out, or I could call Jason on my way home and say, hey, there's something in the fridge, just follow the directions. And then I'd get home and dinner was ready and hot and done. And it wasn't stressful for either of us. And, it was easy. And so that was the first time that I realized doing freezer cooking like that was incredible, because I was never home. I was hardly home, right? And so I was able to take a weekend and get all this work done. So I would prep breakfast and lunches and dinners, which, to be honest, was a whole lot easier when it was just the two of us. I still can easily make that much food and it'll be gone in a week with my whole family, right? And so, or I suppose probably less time than that. So it was much easier because I could pre-make our breakfast for a whole month and I'm only making, a small amount compared. So that worked really, really well for the season I was in. It wasn't too overwhelming. If I tried to do like a full 30-day freezer cooking for my family right now of breakfast, lunches, and dinners, I'd have to spend like a week in the kitchen to actually pull that off. But your seasons change. Your seasons, they ebb and they flow. So if you have a large family and you're struggling with this, go check out Jamarelle Stewart from Large Family Table. I've had her on the podcast several times. She's been in our conferences, but she's amazing. She is the queen of freezer cooking. Watch her stuff and really see the way that she puts things together. And she is incredible at getting very large amounts in the freezer. And she's gotten into such a good rhythm with it all, which I think is so cool. So really just figuring out kind of what season you're in and how this would work. And some of this just takes experimentation, trying out some different freezer cooking methods. That's how I learned everything I know when it comes to freezer cooking, is just absolute experimentation. Try menu, download some instructions online, find some recipes, get a cookbook from your library, and just figure it out. Just try it. See what works and what doesn't work. Okay. Tip number 3 is to stock up. There's a few essentials that I like to have on hand always when I'm doing freezer cooking. Gallon-sized freezer bags. Absolutely a must. So easy to use. So just user-friendly with all of these, so many different recipes. I also like to have several 9x13 casserole dishes. I just said I don't make a ton of casseroles, but you use this for so much. Like you can make the French toast bake that I did is in that. So many different recipes can go in a casserole dish that you freeze and is awesome. So I own 5 9x13 like pans. 2 of them are baking pans, and I try not to freeze those because I need those for like normal cooking. But I have 3 that are glass Pyrex casserole dishes, which are my favorite. 2 of those, no, all 3 of them come with lids. So they already have lids on them. And so it's so easy because I just snap the lid on. I don't have to worry if it's airtight. It already is. And I can stack those very, very easily in the freezer. Those are awesome. The Pyrex, I have 2 of my Pyrex are like, I forget what they call them. They're Pyrex brand, and they're like deep dish. So they're 9x13 casserole dishes, but they're big. And those are my favorite. And then my third one is a smaller, like more standard size casserole dish. But those are amazing to have on hand. So kind of slowly, like I'd like to get a few more of those glass ones with lids, but slowly, like over time, collecting these. Disposable ones also work really well. You can get a whole set of like 9x13 that have lids on top that you can put on. Those are wonderful. They do cost more in the long run, especially if you're going to do this month after month. I think it's slowly and worth investing in some glass ones. But those ones are great too, because then the cleanup is super simple. So those work really, really well. And then make sure you've got, plastic wrap, tin foil to close up ones that you don't have lids for. And really, those are my favorite. Those are the only things that I feel like are really specific for freezer cooking. People get really creative with other things. Like you can freeze, if you have 1/2-gallon mason jars, sometimes people will freeze like soups in those. You can absolutely do that. You got to make sure you leave headway so it doesn't crack. I just find, honestly, as much as I don't like using plastic, we don't have plastic Tupperware. We try not to use plastic, but the freezer bags, like, they're just amazing. That's the convenience that works really well for me. I just make sure I never put anything hot or warm into the bags. I let everything cool first and put it in cold. And then you freeze it. And then when you pull it out, just defrost it. Don't stick it in hot boiling water. Let it defrost. And then that's going to go a long way towards the plastic not causing problems with your food, versus putting hot food into plastic immediately is going to start leaching out some of those toxins and stuff more. So that's what, it's not perfect, but we make it work. All right. The next tip. Okay. So let's talk about some different freezer cooking methods, right? So there's a lot of different things you can do, but off the top of my head, there's a few kind of basic ways that you can do this. Number one is to freeze. And I know a lot of people who do this, and I dabble in this a little bit, is to just freeze the basics. So you can get like 10 pounds of ground beef out, thaw it all, or just, buy it fresh from the store, cook it up, and then freeze like individual 1 pound baggies of like ground beef already browned. It thaws super fast. So you can season it, you can do whatever you want to it. And so then when you're going to do like a quick taco night, you can pull the ground beef out and it's already ready to go. You can also do this with like beans. You can get a big bag of dried beans, cook them in your crock pot. And then once they're cool, put them into individual baggies that are the size of 1 can, or put 2 cups in. And all of a sudden you could have taco night where you pull ground beef and cooked beans out of the freezer. Like you've got some convenience food there that's really easy. People also will freeze, they'll make tortillas or they'll make bread and freeze those. And so that's where you're kind of just freezing the basics and pull them out when you need them. So this can be really helpful when you don't really want to do full meals, but you want to just get some things. You want to be cooking more from scratch, but you need the ease and the convenience of opening up a can, right? So that can help a lot. And then you can just kind of like throw your meals together from there. This is super popular. This is what I think this number 2 is what a lot of people think of with freezer meals. And that's like dump meals. So this is where you throw the raw ingredients into a bag, usually raw ingredients into a bag. And then when you thaw it, you just dump it into your crock pot or your skillet and your dinner's done. So people will do, this is where you'll see a lot of like marinated chicken, where they'll put in like raw chicken breast with a bunch of marinade and like sauce and stuff. And then the directions would be to just freeze that raw. When it defrosts, then you just throw it in your cookbook, in your crock pot, and cook for a couple of hours, and then make some rice or some noodles to go over it. And you've got, your sauce and your, everything ready to go. So that's really, really popular. This is great because in dump meals, you can make like 30 of them in like 10 minutes, because you just like line up your bags and like you're just dumping this stuff in. So if you're brand new and you're like, it would be amazing to just have something in the freezer, that can be a really great method. I have to say it's my least favorite method. Honestly, I just don't find it particularly helpful to have like half-made meals, because a lot of times it ends up just being a meat with like a sauce. And again, that can be really helpful, especially if you're more organized with it. So for me, what I want out of my freezer meals is like the convenience of eating out, right? I want it completely done. I need it for those nights where I'm like, I have nothing planned for dinner, or this week ended up crazy and I didn't get to the grocery store. I need to be able to just pull things out and have it done. So for me, it's not super helpful to have just like a meat and a sauce. If I have to think through other steps and making sure I have stuff, I just don't end up using them. And having like it be kind of a half meal, I don't know. It sounds silly, but I just don't end up using them. And so that is what you have to learn as you do this. Now, I think there are some great dump meals. There's some like soups you can put together really well. So I'm not saying write it off, but play with it and figure out what you like. The next one is just freeze the entire meal. So you're making the whole thing for the most part. You're freezing it. Another method is, pick one area you're really struggling with right now, whether that's breakfast or quick dinners, and kind of focus on that. You don't have, oops, I'm hitting the microphone. Sorry. You don't have to do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You could just be like, I really struggle getting like a nutritious breakfast together. You can make egg bites. You could make healthy waffles. You could make so many different things. Like, you could do breakfast burritos. You could do some like really, really incredible things that you have stored in your breakfast, and your next month, you don't even have to think about breakfast. Breakfast is never an issue. So, thinking through what area am I really struggling with can be really helpful. Plus, like I said, I love breakfast because you can easily have breakfast for dinner. We're huge fans of breakfast for dinner here. So, I think the breakfast does double duty because you can pull it out for breakfast if you need, or save it for dinner. And then again, with these different methods, you can kind of mix and combine them as well. You can have some ground beef in your freezer with some cooked beans alongside a meal or two that's done. So you can really get creative with this. Something that I know a lot of people will do is they'll just cook, like they'll go through a period where they just cook 2 of every meal they're making. So every soup they do, they'll make 2, they'll freeze half. They'll make 2 lasagnas, they'll freeze one of them. And I think that's great because you don't really have to put a lot of extra thought. You don't have to plan a whole day. You don't have to, you don't have to do all these extra things. It just kind of comes together. So again, that's where you start learning this stuff and you realize you can really easily freeze a lot of stuff. When I first started with freezer cooking, I had no idea what you could freeze. I felt like there were all these rules and, it just felt like so overwhelming. And then every time you get to something, you're like, how do I freeze green beans? Okay. How do I freeze this? And you just start to learn tips and tricks to where you don't really have to think about it a whole lot anymore. You can make soup and go, oh, I could freeze half of this. You really get into good rhythms and you really figure it out. Okay. My last couple of tips. I already said this. I try only to freeze whole meals. That is my preference. That is what I like to do. That is what serves me well. So I don't even usually want to have to add something at the end like spinach. If it's like top it with sour cream or sprinkled cheese on top or something that I know I'm going to always have on hand, that to me is a lot easier because it's like, oh yeah, I know I'm going to have that. But if it's something I have to go out of my way to get or remember to have on hand, especially if it's perishable, if it's something like, I don't know, artichoke hearts that you could just have in your pantry, you still could buy that at the time of freezing. But the things that are perishable that you have to add later, either I'm not going to add it later and I'll just know I'm going to skip it if it's fine, or it's probably not necessarily my go-to recipe. All right. Next tip is keep an inventory list on the outside of your freezer so that you know what's in there. This is huge. I skip this half the time, and then every time I skip it, I sorely regret it. Keep an inventory list so you know exactly what's in there. Cross it out when you pull something out, okay? You will thank me later. Next up is to clearly label the meals and to add a date. You think you're going to remember. But you're not going to remember. I know this because I have made this mistake. And yet when I was doing the French toast bake, I was like, it's so obvious what this is. And I'm like, no, that's the thinking that gets you, because once it's frozen, it's not always nearly as easy to figure out what's in there and write the date on it, because you do really forget. And you might find something that's buried way back in the back of your freezer that's like 4 years old. And you're like, oh, we're going to throw that one out. That's actually another good tip too, is make sure you're eating these meals within the right amount of time. Yeah, your meals are going to maybe taste more freezer burnt if they've been in there for a year. Most of these meals you're going to want to eat in the next like 2 to 3 months. Some stuff you can really do up to 6 months, but for peak freshness, this is something you're wanting to eat in the next couple of months. And that's going to really help with the taste and the freshness as well. Okay, then this last tip, this is a golden one. If you are tight on space. So when I first started freezer cooking, we lived in a little tiny apartment where like I was taller than our refrigerator, right? Like a little apartment fridge. And so I really, and our little freezer was just yee big. And so I really had to get creative with fitting all this freezer cooking in. And so my favorite thing to do back then is I would hardly ever freeze anything in casserole dishes because I did not have room for them. And so I'd maybe make one or two that were casserole dishes and then try to eat those first. But even our very small freezer would fit 20 to 30 freezer meals when you freeze stuff in gallon Ziploc bags, but don't just stick them in the freezer. No, you lay them flat out so that they're, an inch thick. Lay them flat out, let that freeze or let it at least cool. And then you put the next bag on top. And before you know it, you've stacked 20 or 30 meals right there in this small little square. All right. So those are my freezer cooking tips off the top of my head. Sure, I'll come up with more as I'm finishing out this freezer cooking, but I feel really thankful that I have forced myself to do this week. I didn't want to do it. Didn't feel like I had the time or the energy, but I knew looking ahead to March and February and March, this would be the wise thing to do. And now I'm like, oh yeah, I need to get back into the rhythm of doing this more often. So what I normally do is I have done this with every pregnancy, except maybe the first, is I know how bad first trimester is for me. And so I usually have kind of a sweet spot between 4 and 6 weeks where I'm not super sick yet. I'm not super fatigued. And I bust my booty to get freezer meals done in those 2 weeks because I know the next 8 weeks or so are going to be really rough for me. But this time, my morning sickness hit at 4 weeks, 0 days, and it hit hard. 4 to 6 weeks were actually some of my hardest weeks. And so I didn't get that freezer cooking done ahead of time. And that's fine. I mean, I couldn't have done anything different. That's just how it all shook out. But now I'm looking ahead and going, yeah, I need to do this a couple of times and then definitely make sure before baby is born that I do another large freezer cooking day, which is what I pretty much do every time. But I think with the last baby, we had a large garden that year and I was doing tons of canning and I just never quite got to it. So this year I'm going to really try to make sure that I get that freezer cooking in, especially seeing like how much success I'm having right now going, oh yeah, this is awesome. So my full freezer cooking meal plan that I'm putting together, by the way, is going to release in March with this new secret project that we're chatting about. I've been filming along the way as I've been making it all. And so you're actually going to get access to that full freezer cooking meal plan, the recipes, everything in March in this new secret project we've got working on, which is going to be really, really fun. So if you need some freezer cooking stuff, just hang in till March. Otherwise, go check out Jamarelle Stewart, Large Family Table. She has so much stuff. You go to Pinterest, go to your library, look for freezer cooking books. I bet you'll find so many great cookbooks. Check them all out, bring them home and start leafing through them. And some of them you're going to be like, there's no pictures. I can't make those recipes. That's how I am. You could be like, those are funky ingredients my family won't eat, or, whatever. And then you're going to find some that are true gems that you can really kind of put together. And also with that, I would say my final piece of advice is don't branch out too crazy. Don't decide like my family's never eaten anything from scratch before, but I'm going to all of a sudden do like a Whole30 freezer cooking meal plan and change the way we eat overnight by doing these freezer meals. Like ease your way in because your family may not eat any of it. Ease your way in. Pick foods that your family is going to actually want to eat. Pick foods that are familiar to you, that are things that you guys want to eat, and start there. And slowly you can start experimenting with changing some things up, adding some things, but try not to jump in too much with like a freezer cooking plan that is so foreign to you that it's also going to be hard to cook because you're like, I've never made these recipes. I've never bought these ingredients. That's probably trying to take on too much, which is what I have done before. So that is just coming from experience there. All right, ladies. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. Don't forget to go check out our final shop closing sale, findingjoyshop.com. We have everything priced at $10 or $5. It ends Wednesday, February 21st. That is when the sale is going to end at midnight that night, or 11:59 p.m., I suppose. So go check that out, findingjoyshop.com, and then look ahead to our brand new project launching March 11th, which is going to be crazy, insane, and so much fun. All right, ladies. Well, I'll see you guys back here next week for the next episode.